Let's bring on our two speakers and we'll get them seated. I'll introduce them and then we'll get underway. So would you please welcome Lawrence Krauss and Peter Rowlands. Welcome. Now you probably know lots about them already, so let me just give you a brief introduction. Lawrence M. Krauss is a renowned cosmologist and science populariser. He's a foundation professor in the School of Earth and Space Exploration and director of the Origins Project at Arizona State University. His most recent bestseller is A Universe from Nothing, and it's been translated already into over 20 languages, and he's part of a film which is being shown tomorrow morning, The New Believers, or Unbelievers. The Unbelievers. The old Unbelievers, the Unbelievers. Peter Rowlands, who joins us, is a leading figure of the radical Christianity movement and author of books such as How Not to Speak of God and Insurrection. A philosopher, a theologian, believer and doubter, he has developed a number of contemplative practices to help Christians accept doubt and complexity, such as Atheism for Lent, which he might talk a bit about later. What we're going to do is we're going to ask Peter in a moment to come to the lectern. He'll speak for up to 15 minutes. Then Lawrence will respond from the chair. Then we'll open it up to a conversation. So please welcome Peter Rowlands.
Hi, thanks very much. It's an honour to be here. I was hoping this would be like a battle of the titans, but both Lawrence and I are a little bit vertically challenged, so it's a war of the hobbits.
Heightism already in the
Yes. Just to say from the start, I'm not here to try and win a debate with Lawrence or score easy points. I'm not here to try and build a fortress from which to lob flaming rocks at new atheism. I'm not here to try to set up a new tradition, and I'm certainly not here as an apologist for some sort of outdated religious worldview. I'm here because I bleed. Because we all do. I'm here because I'm a haunted house, and we're all haunted houses. We're all full of ghosts. The people that we've loved and lost, the people that we've hurt, and the people who have hurt us. It's like the perennial philosopher said, Winnie the Pooh. In his introduction, we read, "Here is Winnie the Pooh coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is as far as he knows the only way of coming downstairs, but sometimes he wonders if perhaps there's a better way, if only he could stop bumping long enough to think of it." And you have that beautiful image of Winnie the Pooh bouncing his head down this staircase. And when I read that and when I read it, I feel that that's all of our experience in life. We're all bouncing our head through this cosmic staircase, wondering if we can make it through a little bit less painfully. And so what has this got to do with the debate between new atheism and what's being called new religion? Well, I want to kind of bring out three critiques of new atheism. I think new atheism is better than that which it attacks. But I want to argue that it is caught up in the same problems and antagonisms as religion. And it often is used to create a new tribal identity, a new way of feeling a sense of mastery over and against the other. And in its antithesis to fundamentalism, it shadows it. So point number one, I want to say that new atheism is a type of shadow of the fundamentalism it rejects. Now, what I mean by that is new atheism concentrates on the what of belief. What do you believe? And it attacks that. It treats religious belief as a problem. It treats fundamentalism as a problem. But what I want to say is that fundamentalism isn't a problem. Fundamentalism is the solution to a problem. Think of it like alcoholism. Alcoholism isn't a problem. It's the solution to a problem. And unless you deal with the problem, you won't get rid of the solution. Even if I'm able to change you, if you're an alcoholic, and I'm able to get you off alcohol through sheer force of will, you'll pick up something else. We all know alcoholics who are chain smokers or obsessively into fitness or have bursts of aggression. In other words, a new symptom will come up to replace the old symptom. Unless you deal with the reason why the symptom is there, you can't get over it. Anger at asylum seekers, that's not a problem. That's the solution to a problem within the society. Unless you can understand the projection that's going on, you'll never be able to deal with the aggression and the fear and the xenophobia. In Northern Ireland, where I'm from, You see this with paramilitaries. Sometimes a kind of terrorist will become a Christian. And the fundamentalism they adopt looks pretty much the same as the terrorism. This has the same texture, it has the same tone, it has the same tenor, because it's really accomplishing the same thing. It's acting as a guise, a mask to protect from seeing your own internal antagonisms, your own ghosts. Now, the response of New Atheism to this, of course, is, hold on a second, New Atheism isn't a positive set of beliefs. It's the negation of a set of beliefs. You know, it's like saying baldness is a hairstyle, or it's like saying that health is a disease. It's a negation. But anyone knows, especially physicists, that nothing can be something. Nothing can have a type of positive charge. If you have an eating disorder, it's not eating nothing, you're eating nothingness itself. The philosopher Jacques Derrida used to tell a story about a rabbi going into the synagogue, and he would bow and say, I am dust and I am nothing. And then this priest came in and bowed down and said, I am dust and I am nothing. And then this imam did the same. And finally, this old guy comes in, the caretaker who's looking after the building, and he says, I am dust, I am nothing. And the three religious leaders look at him and they look at each other and say, who the hell does he think he is saying he's nothing, right? That's how nothingness becomes something. We can protect ourselves. Even I know someone who has very low self-esteem, and the way they protect themselves from that low self-esteem is through self-deprecation. In Northern Ireland, we're really good at self-deprecation. That's what we do. I use it all the time in talks, although I'm not very good at it. So I would attack him and go, well, you're always late. And he would say, yeah, I'm a really rubbish person. You go, stop saying that. You're protecting yourself from feeling me being annoyed at you by being annoyed at yourself, right? The own self-deprecation mechanism operates as a positivity. Hence, I would say you see in New Atheism a sense in which it feels a little bit like the religion it rejects, creating new tribal identities. Second of all, I want to argue that New Atheism legitimizes and strengthens the fundamentalism that it attacks. For example, if you've just had an argument with your mother, and I come up to you and I say, you're a real idiot there. Like, look how you treated her. You shouldn't have done that. You're going to suddenly get your heckles up. And you're going to say, no, I was in the right. You've never lived with this woman. She's a nightmare, right? And you'll justify what you did. Even if you think you did something wrong, you will, because it's a defense mechanism, defense mechanisms operate to protect you from attack. It's like the blob or the evil force in The Fifth Element. They're firing missiles at it. And as the missiles hit it, it actually feeds it and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Or Freddy Krueger, the more you attack him, the worse it gets. The best way to attack Freddy Krueger, if he ever shows up, is to ignore him. I think that's the trick, just letting you know. That's the trick. So if you attack a religious fundamentalist, that just gets a defense mechanism operating at a hyper rate. And even, as I say, if you do beat them, they will then take on the alternative position in functioning in the same way at the level of the what of belief. And by the way, it also legitimates them just to argue. And whenever Lawrence debates William Lane Craig, who do you think is the one going around talking about it all the time? It isn't Lawrence, it's William Lane Craig, because the very fact that someone took him seriously enough to debate is like, look, somebody took me seriously enough to do it. Imagine after this debate, Lawrence and I, we have a few drinks at the hotel room, and he invites me up to do some crazy sexual fantasy, act it out, right? No, I'm not inviting you unless you're interested, because otherwise it's just an example, right? But we're in the room and we're doing something crazy, and he's got the duck outfit on, and it's all going great. And then someone walks in, and we're shocked. We look up and we're surprised. We're not so much surprised because this disbeliever is looking at what we're doing. We're surprised because the gaze of the disbeliever breaks our suspension of disbelief. We realize how stupid we look. What I want to argue is a lot of fundamentalism, it already knows it's not right. If you hear a preacher say, if you pray and you have enough faith, your child will be healed. We all know what that means. We means, unless it's really serious and you call an ambulance, right? That's the underlying unbelief that sustains the belief. That's my problem with unbelief, by the way, is that it actually sustains belief. You have your belief, but you don't really believe it, which allows it to continue to function. It's actually harder whenever someone doesn't call the ambulance, prays for their kid, and their kid dies. That's more of a problem for fundamentalism because it exposes its own kind of lie that's going on under the surface, So what I want to argue is, in the same way that New Atheism shadows the religion it critiques, new religion, as it's being called here, doesn't operate at the level of what you believe. It operates at the level of how you believe what you believe. How do your beliefs function? And in the same way, instead of directly attacking religious fundamentalism, it uses parables and stories and the resources of religion itself to break it open, to not take it seriously. It's the outside gaze to the sexual fantasy that we're playing out. It's the one that goes, I don't know if that's really what's happening. Let's go a little bit deeper. Because if I, instead of saying to you, you shouldn't have treated your mother like that, if I take you out for a drink, we sit down, we have a pint, we have a laugh, and then I say to you, you know, what was that argument about? That was a bit ferocious. You're more likely to go, yeah, I know, I probably acted a bit bad. And you're more likely to change. And finally, I want to say that new atheism doesn't have the resources needed to decenter us in the way that it often claims it does. No worldview can decenter you. What we need is a space to share and rituals and liturgies and music. If you've just broken up with someone, or if I've just broken up with someone, and I go to my friend, look how she treated me. She slept with somebody else. She really treated me badly. She did X, Y, and Z. And my friend said, no, that's not the truth. Come on. You know, like there are lots of problems and issues in the relationship. And I could quite rightly turn around and say, hold on a second. I already know that. But let me get all of this out so that I can come to know what I already know. I know that I mistreated her. I know that I wasn't there. I know that I was always traveling around and I was never in the place where she needed me to be. But I have to say all this stuff so that if I ever meet her in the street, I'll be able to go up to her. I'll be able to shake her hand and say, you know, I miss you and care about you and I wish things had been different. But you know, I think about you and I hope you're doing okay. And what we need as human beings is not a worldview that will help us look at the ghosts in our lives and help us be more human. We need the spaces that invite us to see that within any worldview, despite whatever worldview you have, whether you're an atheist or a theist or agnostic. It's the how of belief that's functioning underneath. Kierkegaard once said, what is a poet? A poet is someone who screams and cries in agony, but whose lips are so formed that when they cry out, beautiful music is formed. And so when we say to the poet, sing to us again, we are saying, may new disasters befall you, right? Now, if you've gone through some deep suffering, you can go out and get drunk, right? And you can go and see a pop band, but the next day the suffering comes back. Or you can go and have a pint and listen to a singer-songwriter sing about their brokenness in a way that helps you glimpse your own, in a way that helps you work through your own, so that you might do the work of mourning. What I'm arguing is that that's what the new religion attempts to do. It attempts to create structures that help us encounter our brokenness and our unknowing. It helps us enter into that space where we're not afraid of the other, not projecting out on the other. It sees fundamentalisms of various sorts, not as the solution or the problem, but the solution to a problem. And it tries to get underneath those things. I'll finish with this. People think it's courageous to talk about what they believe and to fight for what they believe and to die for what they believe, but that's the cowardly thing. Think of Batman. You know, Batman dresses up on Saturday, thinks he's a tough guy, you know, goes and beats up some criminals, right? And then goes back to Wayne Industries, makes billions of dollars, right? He doesn't care about the people he's beating up. Those guys, like criminals, what use is that going to have for Gotham City? Beating up a few criminals who are just trying to put bread on their table, trying to get their kids to go to school. If Batman really cared, he wouldn't spend billions of dollars on high-tech military spec. He would start after-schools children's programs. He would healthcare. He would like job training schemes in Gotham City, much more effective. The Joker might not want money, but the people who work for the Joker do. But Batman doesn't care. Batman's courage is actually fear. Fear of what? Well, fear of looking at the death of his parents. Fear of actually dealing with that stuff and working it through. So he's out there beating up criminals because he's too afraid to look at his own brokenness. The courage is to look in whatever worldview you have and not create a new system to think that we're right, but to rather circumvent every confessional system, to put it perhaps, as the philosopher John Caputo says, a philosopher into every metaphysical system. to deconstruct new atheism, to deconstruct religion, to create a space where we can encounter each other in our brokenness. And people say, this sounds very depressing. No, I'm not trying to make you depressed, honestly. I'm telling you, you already are depressed, you just don't know it. And the way to overcome that depression is to look at the ghosts, bring them to the surface, do some exorcisms. That's what new religion is. That's what new religion does.
Lawrence Krauss, you have to weave in at least one duck costume into your presentation.
Yeah. I've got it already at the hotel.
Yeah.
Okay. I asked Peter to speak first so I might have some basis of understanding what new religion is. But anyway, so let's see. Let's start with new atheism, because that I know is an appropriate term. I don't understand what new atheism is. It's the same good old-fashioned atheism that's always been there, which is not a belief system and not something that cares about what people believe. It's how they think. And in particular, atheists don't spend their time attacking beliefs. They just say that they will choose to accept things on the basis of evidence, and not doing so is foolish. And they don't, and certainly people like me who are apparently called new atheists don't spend their time, I don't label myself as an atheist or a new atheist or an old atheist. I don't label myself at all. I don't label myself an a leprechaunist, an a Santa Clausist. I don't label myself by the things that are too silly to worry about, one of which in general is religion. In fact, what amazed me, and we had a little discussion, a little email discussion, so because Peter was trying to teach me some things. No, in a good way. Is that what I don't understand is why you want to replace a religion that doesn't work for one that's based on angst. It doesn't seem to me that it's any different. It's the same old-fashioned religion, namely believing things in spite of facts. You talked about, I mean, the whole point is that, of course, a lot of the things you said are quite reasonable. We should try and get to the bottom of things and think about why we thinking about things and trying to understand others. But that's kind of, in my mind, what science is all about, or rational thinking. And why you have to call it religion. We're just get rid of it and say, let's be rational. Let's be sensitive. Let's be thoughtful. Let's be considerate. And let's be reasonable people. And we'll base that on the evidence of reality. And we'll try and understand experience, not by trying to experience things from some vague primal sin or whatever, or angst or depression, but from the world the way it really is. And understand that the world doesn't care about us, that we create our own meaning. All of those things, which are really the thrust of science, is a reasonable way to act. And to call it new religion just seems to me to be saying, well, I need some hook. I need something. And you began by saying, I believe. You didn't tell me what you believed. I don't believe. I don't believe anything. I look at stuff and say, well, is that likely or unlikely? Based on evidence, I can test the hypothesis. I can choose if I want to walk out the 10th floor of a building in a window and see if I'll fall, or I can, I've tried it out beforehand and assume I'm gonna fall, so I won't do that. I can base my actions, and that's really the point, that this vague philosophical premise that you did talk about is irrelevant. The real problem is not that. The real problem is that many people who call themselves religious use that religion as a basis for actions which are silly, because they're based on non-facts. They're based on something that isn't true. So they're against gay marriage because being gay is a sin. It's not a sin, or unnatural. It's not unnatural. But that kind of basis, it governs the actions of the world. And if you're concerned about making the world a better place, which is really the reason I get involved in some of this public stuff, and I think science can make the world a better place by getting people to force their beliefs to conform to the evidence of reality rather than the other way around. There are real problems, and religion is a source of real problems. And sure, let's get rid of those real problems. Let's get rid of that nonsense. But why does one have to create a whole new fabrication to do it? Just say, let's deal with reality. Let's call new religion reality. Actually, you know what? Let's call it science. And then we agree. Except, and in fact, before I know I'm begging a question because some people are going to say, "Why isn't science your religion?" No, it isn't. Because religion is something that, in some sense, is based on firm beliefs that don't change, and that's not what science is all about. Science is based on beliefs, if you wish, that change. That's what's great about science. We change our minds because we learn. That doesn't happen in religion. And it's vitally important that we be willing to change our minds. And so when we talk about the problems, let's focus on what the problems are. Let's not say we need some crutch. Now, it is true that religion, in its form, as it's usually practiced, provides some crutch, provides some sense of community. One can't deny that. That's why it persists so long. It provides people something they need. But let's look at what the things they need and try and address those needs in a rational way that makes the world a better place and get rid of the idea that there has to be a belief system based on that. Instead, we just deal with the world around us and, in fact, use that not as a loss. Not to say that God is dead is a loss. It's not a loss, it's a gain. Of course, it's not dead because it never existed. But saying you get rid of God is somehow, we talk about the loss of faith. That itself is a sentence which is incorrect, just as incorrect as the sentence New Atheism, or the phrase New Atheism. Loss of faith is not a loss of anything, it's a gain. And by saying that somehow you lose God and therefore you've lost something intrinsic that we all need, it's just nonsense. It is for some people because it's ingrained. Unfortunately, we ingrain it in children. We do that child abuse of teaching them religion when they're young. And before they have a time, before they're able to talk about Jacques Derrida or whoever, these are deep concepts, but we take 3-year-olds and label them and tell them what they are, and then it gets ingrained, particularly probably if you grew up in Northern Ireland, or anywhere. It gets ingrained in any of us who've had religious training because as children, most of us have. And overcome that and just realize that we don't need to label children. We don't need to feel that we've lost anything by understanding the world for the way it is. Understanding the world for the way it is fills you with awe, wonder, excitement, appreciation. Spirituality, that I've said before, is much better than the spirituality of religion because it's real. And that real spirituality is something we should all celebrate. So let's just celebrate and not take all this stuff too seriously. That's the other thing about religion, that when we say we attack fundamentalists and we strengthen them, well, I've debated a lot whether I should talk to that crackpot, William Lane Craig. And the point is, I don't care about William Lane Craig. I don't care about the fundamentalists. The fundamentalists, you can't change their minds. What you do when you talk to them is you take the vast middle, the rational people, and try and show them the fallacies of one thing, or at least try and get them to think about questions. So the reason to engage those people is not to change their minds, because you're not going to do it. Is to, if anything, if there is any reason, it's to affect the people who are listening who may not have thought about the issue, and to provoke them to think about questions. And that's all really I ever want to do, is get people to ask questions, which is really, and not provide answers, but ask questions and get people to think about the real world and try and come up with the answers together. So anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Okay.
I pose just a question or so to each of you, but as I'm doing it, you might be wanting to make your way to where the microphones are so that you're in position if you've got a question to pose to our panel. So I'll start with you, Lawrence. There were 3 critiques that I took from what Peter said about your approach, and accepting you don't label yourself as anything, but that you are perceived to be part of a movement, if you like, of critique of religion, which I think would be demonstrably true. His three criticisms were that the movement of which you are a part looks and feels like a religion. Secondly, that its strong attacks on fundamentalism and religion generally just reinforce their position. And the third point, that it lacks the resources to decentre us, which I'm not quite sure what that meant, but I'll ask about that later. I want to talk about the first, which you touched on slightly when you said there's a guy that you will debate to expose the middle. But does it worry you that people are perceiving the critical response to religion as being religious in its character? Is it just or does it just wash across you?
If that's if that bothered me, I'd be bothered by a lot of other stuff a lot more. The critiques that I get there are a lot more vicious. Look, people like to label things, and people call. I spend a lot of time with Richard Dawkins, and I'm much more sympathetic with him now than I used to be. I used to argue with him a lot more, till I wrote The Universe from Nothing, in fact. So in The Universe from Nothing, I asked the question, can you create a universe without God? That's all I did, ask the question. I then labeled a strident atheist fundamentalist, okay? So all you have to do is ask questions about religion, and suddenly you're labeled. So people label this movement as a movement, and it's, but it's the same when I get labeled as a scientist, pejoratively by many people. I'm told I practice scientism, and it's a movement, and scientists are no different than religious people. I get those kind of letters all the way. What's the difference? You just believe in the God of science. Well, that's nice for people to say, but it's just nonsense. It's not a movement in the sense of religion. There's no
And joining us tonight on the debate for the full hour, Justin Trottier. He's president of the Free Thought Association of Canada. Author Kathy Shadle, who writes a blog called 5feetoffury.com. United Church Minister Greta Vosper, the chair of the Canadian Centre for Progressive Christianity. Jordan Peterson, professor of psychology at the University of Toronto and the author of Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief. And TVO viewers will well recognize Dr. Rob Buckman, author of Can We Be Good Without God? Behavior, Belonging, and the Need to Believe. Well, thanks everybody for being here this evening for what I'm sure will be a stimulating discussion. We want to remind everybody that our Thursday program is always informed by our viewers. So they have sent us their emails online telling us what show they think we ought to do. And tonight we had quite a conversation going online about this, so this is what we're doing tonight. We also would invite all of you to be involved in the broadcast. Send us your Twitters, your emails, however you like to get to us at the agenda at tvo.org, the agenda at tvo.org. We'll try to get as many of your questions and comments on the air as possible over the course of the hour. I want to put up two emails that we received already, and this will start our discussion this evening. Here's the first one. It says, pure and simple, I'm a theist, and I think the ads are wonderful. The ads in question we will see in a second. Here's the second one. I am so glad to see that finally another view will be aired to the public. As agnostic, leaning strongly towards atheism, and an active humanist, I feel that our voices have been silenced for too long. We've had to endure the ever-accepted presence of religious oppression in our society. We have far too long been forced to remain in the closet about who we are for fear of bigotry. Let's flip that over. And hatred towards us, and even threats of violence simply because we do not believe in God, Zeus, Allah, or any other so-called higher supernatural power. Humanists believe in reason, justice, equality, fairness, and compassion for all humans. Well, what are we talking about here tonight? We are talking about something that Toronto's transit system has decided to start, a new ad campaign for atheism. Shall we show this? Here it comes. There's probably no God, so says the ad. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. That's what the ads say, the so-called atheist bus. So let's go around the horn and get some opinions on this. There's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. Rob Buckman, first impressions.
Well, I love the English campaign. The word probably was put in by the Advertising Standards Association. There's no proof, which of course there can't be. The great thing is if you can get over the idea that there's probably no God, so we're on our own to sort out our own messes. And in many respects, it's that bit. It's not, there's no point in a sterile argument about whether there is or is not. It's only the influence on behavior that really matters. So I absolutely welcome it.
Justin, what's the purpose of these ads?
To generate the discussion that I think we've seen, to really bring atheists and non-theists into the mainstream. And we've seen that. The United Church and various secular and liberal-leaning Muslim and Christian and Jewish organizations have joined us to have a discussion on our website, on their websites, to really take this to the next level and show people that atheists have a point of view, not just on God, but on questions of ethics, questions of free expression, questions of religious accommodation, some of the really very important questions of the day.
Kathy, your view when you saw this ad?
Well, it's certainly an improvement. I'm old enough to remember when the public face of atheism was Madeleine Marie O'Hare, a rather purposefully unattractive woman who was so universally despised that she ended up being someone dismembered her with a chainsaw. So I'd like to congratulate everybody for at least toning it down slightly and presenting a slightly more attractive view. At least we know that no one is going to be left to die in the desert over this.
Greta Vosper.
I was amused when I first saw the ad because the first time I saw a picture of it, it had a picture of Richard Dawkins beside it. And I thought, how on earth did they get away with putting probably in there with Richard Dawkins? Because his idea of probably is that it should be completely taken out of the language relating to God. He's vitriolic about anyone who assumes that the tiny little whiff of a possibility should be completely expunged. So I laughed when I saw the probably. The conversation has to take place for exactly the same reasons that have been articulated already. But I do think that we need to get beyond just the conversation about whether there is or whether there isn't to how it affects our lives and how we choose to live our lives, whether we do or whether we don't believe in
We
God.
shall do some of that tonight. Jordan, your thoughts?
I think it's a juvenile publicity stunt pulled off by people who really neither know about nor care about the actual issues.
Get off the fence and tell me what you really think. Really, no redeeming features whatsoever? You've heard Justin say it's actually kind of provoked a bit of discussion?
Well, I don't really regard atheists as an oppressed group personally. I don't think there's any real historical evidence for that, especially in North America and Europe, and at least recently. And I think the debate is going fine without this sort of stunt, and I think it's basically a media manipulation ploy. It's a good one.
Intrude in there, if I may. You say the discussion's going fine, but I think you're alluding to the Theist Club discussion. You see in the pages of our national papers that religious organizations are frequently invited to discuss issues of ethics, issues of the interplay between science and faith, issues of the reasonable accommodations of religion. You rarely see an atheist or a proclaimed secular humanist from an organization or not actually being invited to participate until relatively recently. So when you say that our country is becoming more pluralistic,
I didn't say that.
Well, you're saying that we're including more people in the discussion. I think you're ignoring the fact that atheists are not part of that discussion until quite recently.
You've seen Dawkins, you've seen Hitchens, you've seen all these guys that write these books on atheism get massive amounts of media play. So it's not like they're excluded. If anything, they're dominant. So I don't buy that for a bit.
3 years ago, that's correct.
What's that?
Richard Dawkins' book came out about 3 to 4 years ago.
Yeah, so and it's got a perfectly fine reception. Mm-hmm. I mean, and there's no evidence that he's being oppressed, even though maybe he should be.
I don't think I used the word oppressed, did I?
I think his point is it's a fairly recent phenomenon that non-believers have been invited to partake in this discussion.
I don't agree. What about Bertrand Russell? I mean, Why I Am Not a Christian is still in print. God love us, after all these years, complete with all its misinformation and juvenile petulance. But so this isn't anything new. Like I said, I'm dating myself, but it seemed to me that every month Madeleine Marie O'Hare was on Phil Donahue and they would have a little fight. And, you know, this isn't new. Perhaps it's your youth that makes you think that it's a new argument.
Well, can I ask you about that word probably? Rob Buckman brought it up a second ago. Is it still considered provocative in 2009 to say there probably is no God?
I can't imagine. I mean, given the atmosphere in universities alone, although you know more about that than I do. I hazard a guess that the real provocative notion is that you're a believer, as the students at the University of Calgary who are pro-lifers discovered when they tried to have a public discussion, and the discussion was literally shut down by people who were calling themselves secular and liberal. So I think sometimes the default rebel position these days is the religious one, but it depends on what region, I think, of the world you're in.
Now that's an interesting, go ahead, Greta.
Well,
and then Rob.
there are a lot of people who have been within Christian community, mainline or evangelical, however, who have not been exposed to any kind of support within their communities or from the atheist or humanist communities, who have wanted to seek beyond traditional doctrinal experiences of their faith, and who have intuited or read or thought themselves to the edges of those doctrinal positions and want to go further, shake their worldviews a little bit. This ad campaign has allowed them to be affirmed in a way that they haven't been affirmed before, and that is a very important part of what I think this campaign has done, and has allowed them to seek out and find some community. And that's a big part of what we do at the Canadian Centre for Progressive Christianity, is try to bring people who are very isolated within faith communities, who have been brought up in traditional Christianity, have conversations with other people so that they don't feel so isolated. Because I don't know that it is that a faith position is necessarily the one that's marginalized these days. Perhaps in secular culture it may seem to be, but a lot of people have grown up within faith traditions, and Christian faith traditions, I mean, and they have these very pervasive beliefs, and they invade the way that they understand themselves and what they've done that's right and wrong and how they're going to be judged for those actions.
Rob Buckman.
I think I agree with you strongly. I strongly disagree with Jordan's use of the word juvenile, because I think the word probably in there is not juvenile. It's actually quite thoughtful. And it really is. I know it was put there, as I said, by the Advertising Council, not by the original people. But it's a fabulous way of saying what you believe cannot be proven, which is a very important definition of belief. And therefore, it makes it mature, not juvenile.
Yeah, I mean, when we decided, the Free Thought Association of Canada, on what ad to use here, what slogan, we opted for the probably, and that was our choice. The Transit Commission never said whether we had to put that in there. We think it's more intellectually honest because we are atheists, agnostics, skeptics, we're doubters. We thought that that was a more profound statement to make. But I also want to pick up on something Greta said.
Forgive me, let me just interrupt there.
Okay.
So you're not just representing atheists, you are representing a broader community.
We're trying to build a big tent, and Greta mentioned community. We're big into that. We often hear that atheists and humanists don't do charitable things, that we have no community. And part of that is true, and we're trying to build that. And people often ask us if all we're doing is trying to raise membership. That's not the first priority, but we are trying to get people together so we can be a voice for them and do some good things together.
Thus the probably, because an atheist, of course, there's no probably.
Right, and it would be a much smaller market that we'd be touching into.
I'm sorry, interrupted. You wanted to make a second point as well.
That was it, actually, the community aspect. That's the first priority of what we're doing.
Jordan?
Well, I guess, you know, there was a little bit of discussion a couple of minutes ago about shaking people's worldviews. You know, and it's not something to be done lightly. So if you, I mean, I'm very interested in what happens to people when their belief systems collapse, and not only what happens to people individually, but also socially. And so what I've learned about that's most profound, I think, probably came from turn-of-the-century thinkers like Nietzsche or Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, who were very much concerned about the demolition of belief structures. And Nietzsche, the philosopher, is a real interesting case in point, because he's the originator of the famous phrase, God is dead. But that isn't the phrase. That's just the phrase that people like to remember. The phrase is, God is dead, and we have killed him, and there won't be enough water to wash away the rivers of blood. And the rest of that phrase is a prophecy for the 20th century that he wrote 25 years before the 20th century began, stating quite clearly that he believed that hundreds of millions of people would be killed in the 20th century because of the decline of standard religious beliefs. That people would turn, in particular, and he prophesied this as well, in particular they would turn to communism. So, you know, none of this is a game. It's very dangerous.
Full quote changes the meaning of that quite significantly.
Yeah, a lot.
Rob Buckman?
I think rivers of blood, unfortunately, are a human characteristic. I would argue with you very strongly that it was not the decline of religion that led to so many millions of dead. There have been millions of dead in the name of religion long before there was any possibility of decline.
Well, not millions.
That argument is also, I think,
yes,
very...
millions, if you add up.
That argument is also...
Over here and then over here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's an interesting argument, because in one way it's true, and in one way it's not. So the thing about global scale religions is that they unite many, many millions of people. Now within that union, there's relative peace. Of course, the problem is that there's different global religions, and then on the borders between those religions, there's still war. Now, people who don't like religious systems point to the battle between religions, but they never really notice that within the religions themselves, millions of people are brought into a big tent, let's say. So, you know, you can't have it both ways. Religion unites and it divides, and if you're going to, you know, pay close attention to the facts, you've got to give due credit to both
I do want to keep the discussion on the ads themselves, but given that you made that point, I feel obliged to let you follow up.
I don't think anybody's after forcing people to convert to atheism. We're not talking about Stalin or Hitler or any of those really pathetic attempts that people make to put all of atheists in.
You don't think you're talking about that.
Well, let me finish what I was going to say, please. What I would like to see is more critical thinking. There are lots of societies where they have great critical thinking and science education. People willingly choose to adopt atheism or secularism. I'm thinking of Northern European countries, and books have been written that have studied the levels of atheism and secularism in countries like Sweden and Denmark. They have great community programs, great social welfare programs. They found a way to adopt to a secular society and build a community without needing to rely on churches.
Okay, Jordan, let me follow up with you on this. You work in the university community, which is supposed to be about challenging assumptions and really getting at the core of things. If this bus campaign makes people question assumptions, some would say assumptions that are made without thought, isn't that a good thing?
Well, I would say a lot of your assumptions are made without thought, and that's partly because a lot of the assumptions that people have are so complicated they can't figure them out. I would also say that, you know, you have to believe things. Like everyone's morality is predicated on faith. Now, there are people who will object to that characterization, but as far as I'm concerned, the psychological data that pertain to that is it's established beyond belief.
Everyone's
morality is predicated on faith. And the reason for that is that there's no, first of all, there's two reasons. One is that you can't know everything. And what that means is that at the bottom of your belief structure, something has to bottom out in faith. That takes the place of absolute knowledge. And the second part of it is that moral decisions themselves aren't based on objective descriptions of the world. They're based on something else, like a faith in the right thing to do. It's not a matter of scientific debate, morality.
I got an example.
Wishy-washy, Jordan. What you're saying is not necessarily what the debate is about. It doesn't say there's probably no such thing as faith. It says there's probably no God. And the point about this argument is really about whether a supernatural force that affects humankind's destinies has an existence. And so far, until very, very recently, that was the assumption. And still at this moment, probably 99.9% of the world believe that there is such a thing as a God. And the beauty of this debate is it's challenging the assumption in the existence of a supernatural being, not in the way you use the word in faith, but in faith in the supernatural, that's all.
And if we go back to the ad campaign themselves and the original ad that was written to respond to some Christian ads that sent people to a website that said that they were going to go to hell for eternity if they did not believe in salvation as given to them by Jesus Christ. So the original ads responded to that. Without that as a background, they may not stand alone as well. But the ends of the ad, so don't worry now, enjoy your life. If you're talking about not being a God, there being no God, then you have nothing to worry about. Or as the United Church campaign came back saying, there probably is a God, so if there is a God, you don't have anything to worry about. If that's your worldview, if your worldview is predicated on there being one or there not being one, if there is not one, then you don't have anything to worry about. The intimation there is that then God isn't going to do bad things to you, which is a very basic premise in our worldview.
Whose worldview?
The worldview of those who are afraid of that kind of God and the intimation in that particular ad campaign, or that in the other ad campaign it's that now God is going to take care of everything. So either of those foundational worldviews have problems with them. So, but the one that's a belief one, that God is going to take care of everything, I think is a particularly dangerous belief system in this day and age. We can't afford to rely on a deity that we think is going to come in and sweep in and make the world a better place.
Jordan, then Justin.
Well, the issue that Rob Buckman raised with regards to faith, well,
You make
the
that
question
distinction?
is, sure, but it doesn't make any difference, because the question then becomes faith in what? Okay, so look at it this way. You can have a coherent system of faith or an incoherent system of faith. Coherent one's better, usually. If the faith system is coherent, there's an ultimate value at its pinnacle. Whatever that ultimate value is, for you, it's God. Now, you might not think so, but the thing about belief is it doesn't really matter what you think about belief, because you don't understand the structure of your own beliefs, and generally they're manifested in action and not in speech. And technically speaking, the value that's at the pinnacle of your hierarchy, whatever that is, for all intents and purposes, that's God. Now, you don't have to believe that, and you don't have to know it, but that's still how it works out.
Justin.
Well, here we are debating faith and atheism, which really is not the introductory debate that we were going to have, but I think it does prove that the ad campaign has been a success, because it's an exact example of the debate we wanted to have. So thank you for participating in that. But to get to what Greta was saying, to get back to that and what I think we're here to discuss, Greta, I appreciated your editorial this week in the Toronto Star, but to tell us that ad on the bus, that's our foundational worldview, to use the words you just used, it's a bit superficial. We're trying to get the debate open. Then we can talk about what our worldview is. If I can defend the use of that, the second part, now, stop worrying and enjoy your life, or relax and enjoy your life. Who are we talking to there? We're talking to a large group of people who are starting to think critically, who are starting to think skeptically, and that is scaring them, because they still have one leg in their faith traditions. And they're worried. What if they're wrong? What if they are going to meet their maker? And he's not going to be too happy with them. And so to those people, we're saying, if your critical thinking leads to a position of doubt, that's okay. Embrace the doubt. Skepticism is not bad.
And I think that that's the least problematic of the two, right?
Let me hear from Kathy on this, because we haven't heard from you in a bit, Kathy. What do you think of this second part of the bus ad, which says, now stop worrying and enjoy your life?
It's funny to me how critical thinking always ends up equating with the latest leftist fads. But I can't let this go by. You were saying that,